As my own son pushed me off a cliff, I pretended to be dead, just to hear him saying, "Now the money is all mine." The cold mountain air filled my lungs. As consciousness crept back into my broken body, every breath felt like shards of glass piercing my chest. I could taste blood, metallic and warm, pooling in my mouth. My left leg twisted beneath me at an impossible angle, screaming in silent agony. But none of that pain compared to what I heard next. Footsteps. Careful, deliberate steps picking their way down the rocky slope above me. I knew those footsteps. I'd heard them cross my kitchen floor 1,000 times over 42 years. "My son. My David. Mom?" His voice echoed off the canyon walls. But something was wrong. There was no panic, no desperation. Just checking. Through my barely opened eyes, I watched his shadow fall across my face. He was close now, close enough that I could smell his cologne, the expensive kind I'd bought him for his birthday last month, when I still believed he'd changed. My chest rose and fell in shallow, painful breaths, but I forced myself to stay perfectly still. Something deep in my survival instincts whispered, "Don't move." That's when he said it. Finally, David whispered, his voice carrying a relief that made my blood freeze. "Finally, the money is all mine." Before continuing, if this story is touching your heart, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Don't forget to ring the notification bell, because every day I'm bringing you stories of women who turn their deepest pain into a new good way of living their lives. I wanted to scream. I wanted to sit up and slap him, demand to know what had happened to my loving son. But my body wouldn't respond, and my mind was racing with a terrible understanding. This wasn't an accident. My own child, the baby I'd rocked through countless fevers. The boy I'd worked 3 jobs to put through college. The man I'd believed had finally learned to love me back, had just tried to murder me. And he thought he'd succeeded. As David's footsteps faded into the distance, leaving me broken and bleeding on the rocky canyon floor, my mind drifted back to where it all began. 42 years ago, when I first held that tiny bundle in my arms at Denver General Hospital. His perfect little fingers wrapped around mine, those innocent brown eyes looking up at me with complete trust. I promised him everything that day. I promised him the world. I was just 19, unmarried, and terrified. His father had disappeared the moment I told him about the pregnancy, leaving me with nothing but a stack of unpaid bills and a broken heart. But holding David, feeling his small chest rise and fall against mine, I knew I would do whatever it took to give him a good life. The early years were a blur of sleepless nights and endless worry. I worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices before dawn, serving lunch at the diner on 5th Street, and stocking shelves at the grocery store until midnight. My hands were always raw from the cleaning chemicals. My feet ached constantly. But every time I came home to find David sleeping peacefully in his crib, it all felt worth it. I remember the night he turned 6 and begged for a bicycle like the other kids in our neighborhood. I had $17 to my name, but I couldn't bear the disappointment in his eyes. So I sold my grandmother's wedding ring, the only valuable thing I owned, to buy him that bright red bike from the pawn shop. When he saw it on his birthday morning, his face lit up like Christmas morning. He threw his arms around me and whispered, "You're the best mom in the whole world." That was my drug. His happiness, his smile, the way he needed me. It made every sacrifice feel like a privilege. Through elementary school, I attended every parent-teacher conference, volunteered for every field trip, and sat in the front row at every school play. Other mothers had husbands to share the load, but I convinced myself that David and I were a team. We were enough for each other. When he was 12, he started asking questions about his father. I could have told him the truth, that the man was a coward who ran away from responsibility. Instead, I made up stories about a hero who died in military service, someone David could be proud of. I showed him pictures of my brother in his uniform and let him believe those were his father. It seemed kinder than the truth. High school brought new challenges. David wanted designer clothes, expensive sneakers, and a car like his classmates. I took out loan after loan, worked overtime whenever possible, and convinced myself that material things would show him how much I loved him. When he graduated valedictorian, I was the proudest mother in that auditorium. 4 years of state college were ahead of us, and I was already planning how to make it happen. College nearly broke me financially, but I managed. I refinanced the house twice, emptied my retirement savings, and lived on cereal and coffee for weeks at a time just to keep the tuition payments current. David called home less and less, but when he did, he sounded happy. He was making friends, joining clubs, talking about his future. That's what mattered. After graduation, he moved to Chicago for his first job. The calls became monthly, then holidays only. When he did call, he always needed something: help with a security deposit, money for a business suit, cash to cover unexpected expenses. I never questioned it. A mother provides for her child, no matter what. Years passed. David climbed the corporate ladder, but money always seemed to slip through his fingers. There were failed investments, expensive dinners with clients, a lifestyle that required more than his salary could support. Every few months, another call would come, another crisis that only I could solve, another promise that this would be the last time. I mortgaged the house again and again. I cashed out insurance policies. I sold everything of value I owned. My mother's china, the antique dresser that had been in our family for generations, even the gold locket David had given me for Mother's Day when he was 8. But something had shifted in him over the years. The grateful hugs became perfunctory. The thank you calls stopped coming. When I visited him in Chicago, he seemed embarrassed by my presence, rushing me in and out of restaurants through back entrances, never introducing me to his colleagues or friends. Last Christmas, I overheard him on the phone with someone, a girlfriend, perhaps, complaining about having to spend time with his needy old mother. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I convinced myself he was just stressed from work. Then, 3 months ago, everything changed. David started calling regularly again. He asked about my health, my finances, my day-to-day life with genuine interest. He even drove down from Chicago to visit, bringing flowers and taking me to dinner at the nicest restaurant in town. We talked for hours like we used to when he was young. "Mom," he said that night, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand, "I've been thinking about how much I've taken you for granted. You sacrificed everything for me, and I want to make it up to you." My heart soared. After all these years of feeling like I was losing him, my son had finally grown up. He understood what love looked like, what family meant. 2 weeks later, he called with an idea. "How would you like to take a trip together? Just you and me. Somewhere beautiful where we can really talk and spend quality time together." I found this amazing place in Colorado. Mountain views, hiking trails, fresh air. "It'll be good for both of us." I could barely contain my excitement. A mother-son vacation, at his suggestion, at his expense. It felt like a miracle. All those years of patience and faith were finally paying off. The night before we left, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, overwhelmed with gratitude. I had raised a good man after all. He had simply needed time to mature, to understand the depth of a mother's love. Tomorrow, we would drive into the mountains together, and I would finally have the relationship with my son that I had always dreamed of. I should have known that 42 years of disappointment don't disappear overnight. I should have questioned why a son who had avoided me for years suddenly wanted to spend a weekend in the wilderness together. But hope is a dangerous thing. It makes you blind to red flags, deaf to warning bells, desperate to believe that love can conquer anything. As I lay there in the canyon, feeling my own blood seeping into the cold mountain earth, I finally understood the truth. David hadn't changed at all. He had simply gotten better at manipulation, more sophisticated in his selfishness. The son I had created through decades of sacrifice and unconditional love had grown into a man, capable of pushing his own mother off a cliff for money. The sound of voices pulled me from the edge of unconsciousness, distant at first, then growing closer. Hikers. A young couple on the trail above had spotted something unusual. A woman's body at the bottom of the canyon. "Oh my God, I think she's alive." The girl's voice echoed off the canyon walls. I wanted to call out, to let them know I could hear them, but something held me back. An instinct deeper than pain told me to stay silent, to let them believe what David wanted everyone to believe, that this was a tragic accident. The rescue took 3 hours. Paramedics rappelled down the cliff face while I drifted in and out of consciousness, careful to keep my breathing shallow, my responses minimal. When they asked my name, I whispered it weakly. When they asked what happened, I mumbled something about losing my footing while admiring the view. "Where's your hiking companion?" one of the paramedics asked as they carefully immobilized my broken leg. My son," I whispered through genuine tears. "He went back to get help." David Martinez. The lie came easily. Let them think he was a hero racing to save me, not a murderer who had left me for dead. At Denver General Hospital, David played his part perfectly. He arrived within an hour of my admission, his face a mask of concern and devastation. The performance was flawless, the worried son pacing in the waiting room, demanding updates from doctors, refusing to leave my bedside. "I should have been there," he kept saying to anyone who would listen. I went ahead on the trail to take photos, and when I came back, she was gone. I searched everywhere, called her name. If only I had been there to catch her. The nurses praised him for his devotion. The doctors commended his quick thinking in calling for rescue services. Everyone saw exactly what he wanted them to see. A loving son, destroyed by his mother's near-death experience. But I saw the truth in his eyes during visiting hours. When the medical staff wasn't looking, when he thought I was too sedated to notice, his mask would slip. The cold calculation returned. The same look he'd had standing over my broken body in the canyon. On the 3rd day, my neighbor Margaret arrived. Sweet, loyal Margaret, who had promised to water my plants while David and I were away. She rushed to my bedside with tears in her eyes, clutching my hand and praising David for being such a wonderful son. "He's barely left the hospital," she told me. "Yesterday I saw him at your house, going through papers in your study. He said he was looking for your insurance information to make sure all your medical bills would be covered." Such a thoughtful boy. My blood ran cold. Insurance information, of course. David wasn't just playing the grieving son for the hospital staff. He was already setting the stage for my death. He expected me to die from my injuries, and he was preparing to collect. That night, after David had left for what the nurses assumed was a well-deserved rest at home, I asked Margaret to bring me my purse from the hospital safe. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and did something I should have done years ago. I started investigating my own son. What I discovered over the next few hours broke my heart more thoroughly than the fall had broken my body. David's gambling debts were worse than I had ever imagined. Not thousands, but hundreds of thousands of dollars. The threatening messages from loan sharks filled his phone records. The desperate emails to online casinos, begging for extensions on payment plans. But that wasn't the worst of it. 3 months ago, exactly when his behavior toward me had changed, David had increased my life insurance policy from $50,000 to $500,000. He had forged my signature on the documents, using his power of attorney privileges that I had foolishly granted him the previous year. When I was in the hospital with pneumonia, the paper trail was damning. Insurance increases, beneficiary updates, and most chillingly, internet searches on his laptop that Margaret helped me access using passwords. She remembered seeing him type, "Hiking accidents, Colorado mountains, how long does it take to die from cliff fall life? Insurance payout, accidental death staged. Accident investigation procedures." My son hadn't just decided to kill me in a moment of desperation. This had been planned for months. Every loving phone call, every thoughtful gesture, every word about wanting to repair our relationship, all of it had been calculated manipulation to get me alone in a place where my death would look accidental. The final revelation came from Detective Sarah Martinez, who arrived on the 4th day as part of routine questioning for serious accident cases. She was a kind woman with intelligent eyes who sat beside my bed and asked gentle questions about the day of the fall. "I have to ask," she said carefully, "because we found some inconsistencies in the timeline. Your son reported you missing at 17 p.m., but the hikers who found you called 911 at 2:43 p.m. That's quite a gap for someone who was searching desperately for his missing mother." I stared at the ceiling, processing this information. 26 minutes. David had waited 26 minutes after pushing me off that cliff before calling for help. Enough time to make sure I was dead. When I survived, he had to quickly change his story from "I found her body" to "I couldn't find her anywhere." Before we continue, make sure to like this video and subscribe. With your support, we can keep bringing more stories from powerful women that touch the heart of all of us. "Detective Martinez," I said quietly, "I need to tell you something. But first, I need you to promise me something." She leaned forward, sensing the shift in my tone. "My son didn't try to rescue me that day. He's the one who pushed me off that cliff." The words hung in the air between us like a confession that changed everything. Detective Martinez's expression remained professionally neutral, but I saw the spark of understanding in her eyes. "Why didn't you tell us this immediately?" she asked gently. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 42 years of misplaced love and willful blindness. Because a mother never wants to believe her child is capable of murder. And because I needed to be sure. Over the next hour, I told Detective Martinez everything. The insurance policies, the internet searches, the timeline inconsistencies, the months of manipulation disguised as reconciliation. She listened without judgment, taking careful notes, asking clarifying questions. "There's something else you should know," she said when I finished. "Your son has been calling our office daily, asking about the investigation status. Yesterday, he specifically asked when your personal effects from the scene would be returned to next of kin. He seemed particularly interested in whether we found your purse and wallet." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. David wasn't just waiting for me to die from my injuries. He was planning to finish what he started. If I recovered enough to leave the hospital, he would try again. The loving son act was just phase 2 of his plan. "What happens now?" I asked. Detective Martinez stood, her expression grim but determined. Now we build a case. But I need you to do something that's going to be very difficult. I need you to keep pretending you don't remember what really happened. Let him think his secret is safe while we gather evidence. You want me to lie to my son about not remembering that he tried to murder me? I want you to stay alive long enough to see justice done. That night, alone in my hospital room with pain medication flowing through my forehead, I stared out the window at the city lights and realized something profound had shifted inside me. The woman who had been pushed off that cliff was gone. The woman who had spent for decades sacrificing everything for an ungrateful son had died in that canyon. The woman lying in this hospital bed was someone new. Someone who finally understood the difference between love and enabling, between motherhood and martyrdom. When David arrived the next morning with flowers and his practiced expression of concern, I looked into his eyes and saw a stranger. Not my little boy, not the child I had rocked through fevers and nightmares. Just a cold, calculating man who had looked at his mother and seen nothing but dollar signs. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, settling into the chair beside my bed with rehearsed tenderness. "Confused," I replied, sticking to Detective Martinez's script. "I still can't remember what happened. The doctors say memory loss is common with head injuries." Relief flickered across his features so quickly that I almost missed it. Almost. "Don't worry about that," he said, reaching over to pat my hand with fingers that had pushed me toward death. "The important thing is that you're alive. Everything else can wait." But I was done waiting. For 42 years, I had waited for this man to become the son I deserved. I had waited for gratitude, for love, for basic human decency. Now I was waiting for something else entirely. Justice. 2 weeks after my accident, Detective Martinez visited my hospital room with news that made my heart race with both terror and anticipation. "We've been monitoring David's activities," she said, settling into the chair beside my bed. "Yesterday, he visited 3 different life insurance offices, inquiring about claim procedures for accidental death policies. He also made inquiries at a funeral home about pre-planning services for when his mother's condition deteriorates." I stared at the ceiling, processing this information. My son wasn't just waiting for me to die naturally. He was actively preparing for my death, perhaps even planning to accelerate it. "There's more," Detective Martinez continued. "We found evidence that he's been researching medication interactions. Specifically, he's been looking into what combinations might cause fatal reactions in patients already weakened by traumatic injuries." The room felt cold suddenly. David had access to my medical information, my medication schedule, my room. He came every day, bringing flowers and playing the devoted son for the nursing staff. It would be so easy for him to tamper with my to bring me something that would interact fatally with my pain medication. "What's our next step?" I asked. "We need him to incriminate himself beyond any reasonable doubt, and we need it on record." Detective Martinez leaned forward. "Are you strong enough to help us catch him?" 3 days later, I was discharged to Margaret's house for my recovery. David insisted on handling all the arrangements. Of course, the perfect son taking care of his fragile mother. He didn't know that the house was now equipped with surveillance equipment, or that Detective Martinez and her team were stationed nearby. The plan was simple but dangerous. I would let David know that my memory was starting to return, that I was beginning to remember fragments of what really happened on that cliff. We would give him the opportunity to silence me permanently, and we would catch him in the act. On a gray Thursday morning, exactly 3 weeks after he had pushed me off that cliff, David arrived at Margaret's house with his usual bouquet of flowers and his practiced smile. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, settling into the chair beside my bed in the guest room. "Better," I said, following the script Detective Martinez and I had rehearsed. "My head feels clearer. I've been having these strange dreams, or maybe they're memories, about the day of the accident." David's posture shifted slightly. The change was subtle, but I knew him well enough to recognize the tension that crept into his shoulders. "Dreams can be confusing after a head injury," he said carefully. "The doctors said your memory might never fully return, but it is returning," I pressed on, watching his face. "I remember walking to the edge of the cliff to take photos, and then I paused dramatically, as if struggling to recall. There was someone behind me, someone I trusted." David's hand tightened on the arm of his chair. "What exactly do you think you remember?" "I remember hands on my back, pushing hands." I looked directly into his eyes. "I remember falling because someone pushed me." The mask slipped completely then. The caring sun vanished, replaced by the cold-eyed stranger who had left me for dead in that canyon. David stood up slowly, his entire demeanor changing like a switch being flipped. "You don't remember anything," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You fell because you were clumsy and careless, just like you've been your entire pathetic life." "David," I whispered, genuinely shocked by the venom in his voice despite expecting this moment. "Don't David me," he spat. "Do you have any idea what you've cost me? 42 years of your neediness, your constant demands, your suffocating love. I should have been free to live my own life, but instead I had to carry the burden of your expectations." I stared at this stranger wearing my son's face. "I gave you everything. I sacrificed everything for you. You gave me nothing but guilt and obligation." David's voice rose, his control slipping further. "Every phone call was a reminder of how much I owed you, how much I should be grateful for. Well, I'm done being grateful for a life I never asked for." He began pacing the small room, his agitation growing with each step. "Do you know what it's like to have a mother who makes every conversation about her sacrifices? Who uses her love like a weapon to manipulate you into feeling guilty for having your own life?" "I never meant to make you feel that way," I said, tears streaming down my face. These weren't scripted tears. They were real, born from the final death of any hope I'd harbored that some part of my loving son still existed. "Of course you didn't mean it," David sneered. "You never meant anything. You just did it, year after year, taking and taking and taking. My time, my money, my freedom. And now, when I finally found a way to be free of you, you have to ruin that too." He stopped pacing and turned to face me, his eyes cold and calculating. "But you're not going to ruin it. You're going to have a little accident right here in this bed. A reaction to your pain medication, maybe. These things happen to elderly patients recovering from trauma." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the moment when my son would reveal himself to be not just a would-be killer, but an actual murderer. I knew Detective Martinez and her team were listening, recording every word. But I was still alone in this room with a man who had already tried to kill me once. David reached into his jacket and pulled out a small vial of clear liquid. "This is a concentrated dose of morphine, mixed with your current pain medication. It will stop your heart within minutes. You'll just drift away in your sleep, peaceful, painless, and most importantly, untraceable after a few hours. Please," I whispered, not entirely acting now. "I'm your mother. You're an obstacle," he corrected, approaching my bed with the vial. "You've been an obstacle for 42 years, and I'm tired of working around you." He pulled out a syringe and began filling it with the clear liquid. The beautiful thing about this plan is that everyone will think it's tragic but natural. An elderly woman, weakened by trauma, succumbing to complications. I'll be the grieving son, devastated by losing his mother so soon after nearly losing her in that terrible accident. You planned all of this? I said, stalling for time. The trip, the cliff, all of it. For months, David confirmed, holding up the filled syringe. Do you know how liberating it was to finally stop pretending I cared about you? Those weeks of playing the loving son, planning our special trip together. It was the first time in years that I felt genuinely happy, because I knew it was all leading to your death. He moved closer to my line, the syringe gleaming in the afternoon light streaming through the window. $500,000, plus whatever equity is left in your house after I pay off your debts. Not a fortune, but enough to start over somewhere else, free from the burden of being your son. You won't get away with this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. David smiled, a cold, empty expression that held no trace of the boy I had once loved. I already got away with it once. This time will be easier. He reached for my line with the loaded syringe. That's when Detective Martinez burst through the bedroom door, her weapon drawn and her voice commanding. Police. Drop the syringe and step away from the bed. David froze, the syringe inches from my port. For a moment, I thought he might actually inject the morphine anyway, choosing to complete his murder even if it meant certain capture. Instead, he slowly turned to face Detective Martinez, his expression shifting through confusion, rage, and finally a cold calculation that chilled me to the bone. You can't prove anything, he said calmly, still holding the syringe. I'm here caring for my sick mother who's been having delusions since her accident. This medication is prescribed for her pain management. That's not prescribed medication, Detective Martinez said firmly, keeping her weapon trained on David. That's a concentrated morphine solution that would kill her within minutes. And we've been recording this entire conversation. David's eyes darted around the room, finally noticing the small surveillance devices that had been placed. While he thought I was helplessly recovering in the hospital. You set me up, he said, looking at me with pure hatred. Even dying, you had to manipulate the situation. I didn't set you up, David, I said softly. I gave you every opportunity to be the son I raised you to be. You chose to be a murderer instead. Two more officers entered the room, and David finally dropped the syringe, his shoulders sagging in defeat. As they read him his rights and placed him in handcuffs, he looked at me one final time. I should have pushed harder, he said quietly. I should have made sure you were dead. Those were the last words my son ever spoke to me. Not an apology, not an expression of regret or love, just the cold admission that his only mistake had been failing to complete my murder. As the officers led him away, I lay in that bed and realized something profound. The woman who had spent 42 years loving an ungrateful son was finally free. Free from the burden of unconditional love that had been killing me slowly for decades. David had tried to murder me for money, but in doing so, he had accidentally given me the most precious gift of all, the truth about who he really was, and the permission to finally stop loving someone who had never loved me back. The trial began for months after David's arrest. On a crisp October morning when the Colorado mountains were painted in shades of gold and crimson, I sat in the witness stand, looking out at a courtroom filled with strangers who had come to watch a son be tried for attempting to murder his mother. The irony wasn't lost on me. After 42 years of loving someone in private, our story was finally being told in the most public way possible. David sat at the defendant's table in an expensive suit I had probably paid for years ago. his expression vacant and cold. He never once looked at me during my testimony. Not when I described the decades of sacrifice. Not when I recounted the moment he pushed me off that cliff. And not when I played the recording of him confessing his intention to kill me with morphine. He stared straight ahead as if I were already dead to him. Detective Martinez had done her job well. The evidence was overwhelming. The forged insurance documents, the internet searches, the recorded confession, the attempted poisoning. David's defense attorney tried to paint me as a manipulative mother who had driven her son to desperation. But the jury saw through that narrative quickly. The defendant didn't snap under pressure. The prosecutor explained during closing arguments. This was a calculated, premeditated plan to murder his mother for financial gain. He researched methods. He staged opportunities. And he showed no remorse when he believed he had succeeded. The verdict came back in less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder in the first degree, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. David was sentenced to 30 years in prison without possibility of parole for 15 years. When the judge read the sentence, David finally looked at me. His eyes held no remorse, no sadness, no trace of the little boy I had once rocked to sleep. Just emptiness, as if he were looking at a stranger who had inconvenienced him. After the trial, Margaret helped me pack up my house. I couldn't live there anymore. Too many memories of the woman I used to be. The mother who had confused enabling with love for decades. We found boxes of David's childhood artwork in the attic. Report cards praising his intelligence. Photos of birthday parties where my face glowed with maternal pride. "What do you want me to do with these?" Margaret asked, holding up a finger painting David had made in kindergarten that read, "I love you, Mommy," in uneven letters. I looked at that painting for a long time, remembering the day he brought it home. How proud I was to hang it on the refrigerator. That little boy who painted those words was real once. But the man who tried to kill me for insurance money was also real. "Throw them away," I said quietly. "All of it." I moved to a small apartment across town and started over at 68 years old. For the first time in my adult life, I woke up each morning thinking about what I wanted to do, not what someone else needed from me. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. 6 months after the trial, I started volunteering at a support group for parents of adult children with substance abuse and criminal issues. I met mothers who had been stolen from, lied to, and manipulated by children they had loved unconditionally. Women who blamed themselves for their children's choices, who thought that love could cure addiction, mental illness, and moral bankruptcy. "You didn't make him a killer," I told a woman whose son was serving time for armed robbery. "You made choices based on love. He made choices based on selfishness. Those are not the same thing." The words I spoke to others were lessons I was still learning myself. For 42 years, I had believed that a mother's love could overcome anything, fix anyone, solve every problem. I had confused sacrifice with love, enabling with support, and guilt with responsibility. Detective Martinez visited me occasionally, checking on my recovery and my emotional state. During one visit, she told me something that stayed with me. "You know, in all my years investigating family crimes, I've learned that the most dangerous people are often those who know they're unconditionally loved. They feel entitled to take everything while giving nothing back." I thought about that a lot in the quiet evenings in my new apartment. David had grown up knowing that no matter what he did, no matter how he treated me, I would always be there with open arms and an open wallet. I had taught him that his mother's love had no boundaries, no conditions, no limits. In doing so, I had accidentally taught him that I had no value. A year after the trial, I received a letter from David in prison. My hands shook as I opened it, some small part of me hoping for an apology, an acknowledgement of the pain he had caused, some sign of the loving child I remembered. Instead, the letter was a complaint about prison conditions and a request for money to buy better food. From the commissary, not once did he mention the cliff, the attempted poisoning, or the trial. He signed it David, not your son or love, just his name, as if I were a casual acquaintance. I crumpled the letter and threw it away. Then I sat down and wrote my own letter, not to David, but to myself. I wrote about the mother I had been and the woman I was becoming. I wrote about the difference between love and desperation, between sacrifice and self-destructs. I wrote about forgiveness not for David, who had shown no remorse, but for myself. For the decades I had spent loving someone who was incapable of loving me back. The mountains are beautiful in Colorado, especially in spring when the snow melts and wildflowers push through the earth toward the sun. I hike those mountains now, carefully, with proper equipment and a hiking group. And sometimes I think about that cliff, where my old life ended and my new one began. David wanted my death to be his beginning. Instead, surviving his attempt to kill me became mine. I learned that there's a difference between the child you raise and the adult they choose to become. I learned that unconditional love doesn't mean accepting unacceptable behavior. Most importantly, I learned that a mother's greatest gift to her child isn't blind devotion. It's teaching them that love requires mutual respect, kindness, and genuine care for others. The woman who fell off that cliff was someone who believed that her worth came from how much she could sacrifice for others. The woman who survived that fall learned that her worth came from being alive, from having value as a human being separate from her role as a mother. David is serving his time in a maximum security facility in southern Colorado. He'll be eligible for parole when he's 57 years old. I'll be 83 then, if I'm still alive. I hope I am, not because I want to see him again, but because I want to live long enough to see the woman I'm still becoming, the woman who learned that surviving isn't the same as living. And that sometimes the greatest act of love is learning when to stop loving someone who will destroy you. If this story moved you, click on the next video that's appearing on the screen now. I'm sure you'll be surprised by this new emotional and heartbreaking story I have right here to tell you.